Hello dears, today we are going to speak about the tales. Because a fairy tale is an integral part of a childhood. It is unlikely that there will be a person who as a child did not listen to a lot of different stories. Growing up, he retells them to his children, who understand them to their own way, drawing in the imagination the image of existing characters and experiencing the emotions that the fairy tale conveys. Definition for a tale is the following. According to the scientific definition of the literature, a fairy tale an epic literary genre, a narrative of some magical or adventurous events that has a clear structure, the beginning, the middle, and the ending. From any tale, the reader must learn some lesson, morality. Depending on the type, the fairy tale performs other functions. There are many classifications of the genre. The main types of fairy tale. What are the tales? Each of us will agree that in a separate species it is worthwhile to highlight tales of animals. The second kind is fairy tales. And finally, there are so-called everyday fairy tales. All species have their own characteristics, which become clear by comparative analysis. Let's try to understand more in each of them. What are the tales of animals? The existence of such stories is fully justified, because animals are creatures that live with us in the immediate vicinity. It is this fact that has influenced the fact that folk art uses images of animals and the most diverse, both wild and domestic. At the same time, it should be noted that animals found in fairy tales are not represented as typical animals, but as special animals endowed with human features. They live, communicate, and behave like real people. Such artistic techniques make it possible to make the image understandable and interesting, filling it with a certain meaning. In turn, tales of animals can also be divided into fairy tales involving wild or domestic animals, objects of an animate nature. Often the literary critics speaking about what kind of genre of fairy tales happen classify them into magical, simulative, and satirical. Although in this classification is the genre of the fable, you can divide tales on animals into works of children and adults. Often in a fairy tale there is a person who can perform a dominant or secondary role. Usually with fairy tales about animals, children get acquainted still at the age from the 3 to 6 years. They are most understandable to small readers as they meet with regular characters: a cunning fox, a cowardly hare, a grey wolf, a clever cat, and so on. As a rule, the main feature of each animal is its characteristic feature. What are the stories about animals? The answer is very different. Simulative tales, for example, are selected according to the principle of story communication, where the same characters meet just in different circumstances. The second kind is a fairy tale that are the literary tales of magic. The main characteristic of this species is a magical, fantastic world in which the main characters live and act. The laws of this world are different from the usual ones. Everything is different in it. In fact, what attracts young readers and makes these kind of fairy tales undoubtedly the most beloved among children. It is no secret that the child's imagination is unlimited and it's very, very difficult to satisfy it. In most cases, this kind of fairy tales has a typical plot, certain heroes and a happy ending. What are the tales of magic? It can be narratives about heroes and fantastic creatures, tales of unusual objects and various tastes that are overcome by magic. As a rule, in the final, the characters marry and live happily ever after. Note that the heroes of a fairy tale embody such set of positive qualities. Among the main themes of this literary genre is the struggle between good and evil, the struggle of love, truth and other ideals. Must be present a negative hero who in the finals will be defeated. The structure of the fairy tale is the usual, the beginning, the main part and the ending. Household tales. Such stories tell of the events of the ordinary life, eliminating various social problems and human characters. In them, the author derides negative human qualities. Such tales are social and satirical, with elements of a fairy tale and many others. Here, the negative qualities of rich and vain people are laughed at, while representatives of the people embody positive features. Household tales show that the main thing is not money and strength, but kindness, honesty, and intelligence. Literary scholars affirm that this is a fact, that they were written at a time where people were experiencing social crises, sought to change the structure of society. Among the popular art techniques here stand out satire, humor, laughter. What types of fairy tales happen? In addition to the above classification, fairy tales still divide into copyright and folk. Already from the names it is clear that the author's fairy tales which were written by a specific famous storyteller, and folk those that don't have one author. Folk tales are passed from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, and the original author is not known to anyone. Let's consider each type separately. Folk tales. Folk tales are rightly considered powerful source of historical facts, information about the way of life and the social structure of a certain people. Each of the peoples for their history came up with a huge number of instructive stories for adults and children, conveying their experience and wisdom to the next generation. Folk tales reflect human relations and change of moral principles, show that the basic values remain unchanged. They are taught to draw a clear line between good and evil, joy and sorrow, love and hatred, truth and lies. A feature of folk tales is that in a simple and easily readable text conceals the deepest social meaning. In addition, they preserve the richness of the national language. What folk tales happen? They can be both magical and domestic. Many folk tales tell about animals. Often the question arises as to when invented the first Russian folk tale. It certainly will remain a mystery, and one can only guess. It is believed that the first heroes of fairy tales were natural phenomena, the sun, the moon, the earth, and so on. Later they began to be the man and the image of included people and animals. There is an assumption that all Russian folk narrators have a real basis. In other words, the event was retold in the form of a fairy tale, changed over the centuries, and reached us in the form of which we are accustomed. What are the Russian folk tales? Figure it out. It's time to talk about fairy tales whose authors are well known to readers. Author's tales. Usually the author's work is subjective processing of the national plot. However, new stories are found quite often. Characteristic features of the author's tale: psychologism, subtle speech, bright characters, the use of fairy tale cliches. Another feature of this genre is that it can be read at different levels, so the same story is perceived differently by representatives of different age groups. Children's tales of Charles Perrault to the child seem an innocent story, while an adult person will find in them serious problems and morals. Often the books that were initially targeted at the young reader and interpreted by adults in their own way, as well as fantastic stories for adults that children like to taste. Who are they? The authors of fairy tales. Surely everyone has heard about Tales of My Mother Goose by Charles Perrault, the Tales of Italian Goosey, the works of German writer Wilhelm Hoff, the Brothers Grimm, and the Danish fairy tale Hans Christian Andersen. We should not forget about the Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Their stories are loved by children and adults around the world. Entire generations are growing on these tales. At the same time, all authors' works are interesting from the point of view of literary criticism. They all fall under a certain classification, have their own artistic features and authoritative techniques. By the most famous and favorite fairy tales, film and cartoons are made. England has been the birthplace of many of the most well-known children's stories, including Jack and the Beanstalk and Tom Thumb, the little boy no bigger than his father Thumb. Similar to other European countries, an English fairy tale tradition emerged from those folklore stories that are believed to have originated in the British Isles. This folklore developed over centuries through the storytelling tradition and is unequal, given the distinct culture and identity of the land's various regions. As such, England's fairy tales and folklore tradition has strong connection to Celtic, Germanic, and Christian sources. Jacobs was an Australian collector and publisher of England's folklore and authored English fairy tales. The goal of this work was to popularize folk tales of England among children and adults, as many readers were caught up in the folk tales of Germany and France at the time. Jacobs is one of the most known English storytellers of folk tales and fairy tales, and his work also helped preserve ballads after he wrote them as tales. He later published a second volume, More English Fairy Tales. Another notable literary figure in England's folklore is Flora and Steele. Steele took on some of popular folk tales in England at the time of publication and shared them with a new audience. The country's folklore has its own dialect, with each region's tale offering something new for the reader. The characters within the stories include mythical creatures or spirits such as brownies, elves, boggarts, orgies, giants, and trolls. You will also encounter heroes, cunning folk wizards, and plenty of reality in the English folk tales. Many of the tales are rich in superstition, sharing rules about various folk beliefs. For example, a tale about a donkey to a market. Long ago, there was a man named Heck who, with his son, raised a donkey's calf. When the calf grew up, it became a handsome and plump donkey, with brown and smooth hair. On seeing the fine grow-up donkey, the man said to his son, "Now our donkey has become fat and nice. If we sell it now, we can get a good price for it. But in our village there is no one who needs a donkey, and the village where someone needs one is very far from here. If we make the donkey walk to that faraway village, it may get thin by figure and fatigue, and its price will go down. How can we get a good price for it?" Finally, the man and his son decided what to do. They caught the donkey, fastened each pair of its feet tightly together, passed a pole between the pairs of feet, and shouldered its two ends. Thus they began to carry it to the faraway village where they hoped to get a good price. While going on their way, they were seen by villagers who were much amused to see such a sight. They burst into laughter and said, "Hey, what a strange thing, two men carrying a donkey!" They chided the man. "Old man, do not do so. The horse, the ox, the elephant, and the donkey have never been carried by men. It's they which have to carry men on their backs." After some time, they came near a well at the end of a certain village. Around this well there was a throng of young women who came to draw water from there. Some were noisily pouring water on their body for a bath. Looking at the handsome young man walking slowly behind the donkey, they felt a great sympathy for them. The young woman approached the donkey and said roughly to the old man, "This young donkey is fat and pretty. It is worthy of a young man who is in the same happy state. An old man like you is not fit to ride on it." When the old man and his son heard such unkind words, they discussed the matter. "We will both ride together, and the donkey you in front and I behind you," decided the old man. And sitting like that, they continued the journey. On hearing this, the father and the son took down the donkey and untied it. The father then said to the son, "We cannot ride all at once, for our donkey is not strong enough to carry both of us. So ride alone on it, and I will follow you." And so the young man did. As they were passing through another village, the young man was asked, "Where are you riding, boy?" "I ride to a village called Kampeng," answered the young man. And pointing to the old man, they asked, "Who is this old man behind you?" "He is my father," the young man replied. On hearing this, the villagers became angry and said, "What an ungrateful son you are! You are strong enough to walk, while your old father is not so." After crossing some distance, they reached a custom house. They were then seen by an officer of the custom house who asked, "Where are you going, man?" "We are going to the village of Kampeng," they answered, and the officer scolded them. "Your donkey is not strong and old enough to carry both of you. If you keep on riding along as far as the village of Kampeng, it will become thin and its price will go down. How foolish you are! Why don't you let it walk?" Again they got off the donkey and led it by means of a rope. When they arrived at a field, there was no road for them to go any further, so they began to cross it to find another way. The owner of the field, who was working there, cried out from a distance, "Walk carefully, old man. My field is full of thorns, for it is not yet cleaned up. But you have a donkey, why don't you ride it to avoid the thorns?" Why do you treat it as your ruler? How foolish you are. The father and son looked at each other. We cannot be in agreement with all people. Whatever we do, we get a scolding from someone. At last they agreed. We will just have to travel as we see fit and put up with the blame as it comes. They went on and finally reached the village of Kompeng. There they sold their donkey for a very good price and returned home without further loss of time. Here are given some discussion questions, and so what do you think about if everyone has an opinion on the best way to get the donkey and its owner to the town? Which do you believe was the best idea? Why? Describe a time when many different people told you many different ideas about how to do something. How did you decide what to do? And conclusion. In conclusion, we want to mention that so we figured out that fairy tales are, what are they? Whatever the fairy tale is, author's folk, social, magical, or narrating about animals, it will necessarily teach the reader something. The most interesting is that it does not matter who reads the story. Both adults and children will certainly learn something useful from it. Everyone's tale will make you think, pass on the wisdom of the people or the author, and leave an undeniable good impression in the minds of readers. The effect is not at all exaggerated. There are even so-called therapeutic fairy tales which are able to re-educate and wean from a variety of bad habits. Thank you for your attention. See you the next time.